Resident Evil Requiem is finally out, and this marks the 9th mainline title in the franchise. It's hard to believe that in the modern day gaming industry, that a beloved franchise like this could go on long enough to have 9 mainline games and not lose its identity. The success that Capcom has had with this franchise is insane, when you compare them to the other beloved franchises that have been struggling to find the fan base that they once had. As of the making of this video, Capcom has just announced that Resident Evil Requiem has sold 5 million copies within the first 5 days of its launch. It was my most anticipated game of the year, and I believe it was for many people right behind GTA 6. And personally, I was looking forward to this even more than GTA 6, and I don't think that that's an unpopular opinion. Requiem is another solid entry in a series full of solid entries. So what does it do to separate itself from the games that have come before it? Well, for the longest time, this fan base has been split in two, with those who prefer the more traditional survival horror gameplay of the originals, and those who prefer the more action horror gameplay of 4, 5, and 6. Maybe not 6.
I don't suppose I think I can fly a plane, do you?
Fans of these games enjoy both halves, but they also probably have one that they enjoy more than the other. I find myself firmly in the middle. I've played every mainline Resident Evil game, including Code Veronica, and I enjoy both sides equally. And Requiem feels like a game that was made to be a love letter to the fans of the series who enjoy all of the games. There's something here for everyone, and if you're a fan of both, then you'll enjoy everything that this game has to offer. Requiem introduces a split protagonist campaign, with each one representing one half of the franchise's core playstyles. Newcomer and daughter of Resident Evil Outbreak's Alyssa Ashcroft comes the new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, and she represents the survival horror side of the game. Meanwhile, returning Resident Evil sweetheart Leon Kennedy represents the action horror side of the game. Requiem attempts to take both halves of the playstyles people enjoy and mixes them together with a campaign that switches between them at set points throughout the story. The Grace sections feature many of the classic ideas you'd expect. There's limited ammo, inventory management, you gotta gather key items to solve puzzles. All the hallmarks of survival horror are here, and they're all done well enough. I did my first playthrough on the hardest difficulty available, Standard Classic, and at no point was I ever comfortable. I had ammo, but never enough that I felt I could take on every enemy, and even if I did, the Crimson Head mechanic from the Resident Evil 1 remake makes a return here. This means that any enemy that you kill, if you don't destroy the body, they'll come back as a blister head. The blister heads are strong variations of the normal zombies. They're fast, they hit hard, and they take a ton of bullets to take down. I love this mechanic in Resident Evil 1 Remake, and it's great here as well. Just because you have the ammo to take out an enemy, you need to decide if it's worth it, because you might make the area more dangerous later in the game. It trades temporary safety for trouble down the road, and forcing players to make decisions like this is what makes survival horror so interesting. The enemies in this game are also very unique. These aren't the usual zombies. Requiem zombies are all their own unique characters. Since they're all recently mutated, they still carry out some of the jobs that they had when they were alive. Meaning the chef zombie will still be cutting meat in the kitchen, and the maid zombies, they'll still frantically clean up any blood spills. They also can interact with each other in unique ways as well. There's a zombie that is sensitive to sound, so if you throw a bottle near another enemy, he'll come over and take them out for you.
That way!
I loved this mechanic. This was a very creative way for them to make the overused zombie enemies interesting to fight again. Grace also has access to Leon's Magnum, the Requiem, and this adds another level to the resource management because bullets for this powerful gun are limited and you'll need to carefully decide when you want to use them. You can use it as a get out of jail free card, or if there's multiple enemies lined up, you can use it to take them all out in one bullet.
Jesus.
But be careful, because if they turn into blister heads, you'll almost always need to use another Requiem bullet to take them out again. I liked how this counterbalanced the vulnerability you feel as Grace by giving you this powerful weapon that you now need to manage, or else you'll quickly run out of bullets. There's also plenty of useful items you can craft using scrap and infected blood you find or collect from enemies. How making handgun bullets from blood makes sense, you'll have to ask Capcom about that. For me, it's a video game, so who cares? People who use realism as a barometer for what makes a good game, they're killjoys. Sometimes game mechanics won't make sense, and that's fine because it's fun and this is a video game. Don't take it too seriously. But this mechanic also adds another layer of not only resource management, but player choice as well. You can craft an item called the Hemolytic Injector, and this item can be used to stealth attack enemies and blow them up. I don't know how that's stealthy, but it is. This means you'll have a multitude of options in how you can handle enemies. You can use handgun bullets to take down enemies, but then you'll have to deal with them later as blister heads. You can also use a Requiem bullet if you have them, or you can use precious resources to blow them up, permanently eliminating them. Giving the player multiple choices in how they can tackle obstacles is what separates survival horror from hide and seek horror. And speaking of hide and seek horror, there are multiple sections during Grace's gameplay where she will be stalked by a tall, pale, monstrous looking woman named the Girl. Stalker enemies are a long-lasting tradition with Resident Evil, with a prototype one being used in the original Resident Evil 2 with Mr. X, then the first fully fleshed out one with Nemesis in Resident Evil 3. The first section you have with the Girl is early in the game and you'll have no weapons to defend yourself. This is where the new emphasis on stealth comes into play. You'll need to sneak your way around this stalker while searching for items that give you a way out. These sections were a fun spectacle on the first playthrough, but what I've noticed now on repeat playthroughs is how scripted these moments can be. She almost always shows up at the same moments and walks the same paths, even in later sections like the basement or the water treatment facility. These stalker type enemies are best used when they hunt for you dynamically. The original Resident Evil Nemesis is probably the best use of this in the series, but games like Alien Isolation and Amnesia the Bunker are also perfect examples of this type of enemy being used effectively. I'd like to see Resident Evil treat these stalker type characters as dynamic obstacles instead of set piece spectacles. An overuse of characters like this can be detrimental to the genre that Resident Evil excels at. Survival horror lives and dies by the resources you use and the choices you'll make in order to overcome the game's challenges. But with unkillable enemies, you only ever really have one choice, and that's to hide. This hide-and-seek gameplay was made popular by games like Amnesia and Outlast, and companies have been trying to trend chase it ever since. That's why these enemies are best used to a limited degree, and it is effective here for the few sections she shows up, but again, these parts would benefit from a bit more dynamic AI. This emphasis on stealth during these sections carry into the rest of Grace's playthrough, and it is used to mix results. Stealth was in Resident Evil 7, and you could do stealth takedowns in Resident Evil 4, but this is definitely the most prominent use of it in the series. Maneuvering around enemies to save resources has always been a hallmark of Resident Evil, even during the tank control days. But in this game, the mechanics still feel a little half-baked. It's a little odd that zombies will sometimes stare right at you, but then they won't see you. But then other times, they'll spot you from across the room. It feels like their detection range is extremely linear. They also have set ranges that they're allowed to maneuver in. If you're caught, it doesn't matter if you break line of sight. As long as you're still in the area that they're allowed to be in, they won't lose you. I tested this out a few times. Enemies will only follow until they get too far from their designated spots before they give up and walk back. It would be more interesting if once you broke line of sight, the zombies would now patrol the last place they saw you before returning back to their predetermined placements. And for the first few minutes of Grace's gameplay, you don't have a handgun, so they force you into this stealthy playstyle. I think if you're gonna put a bigger emphasis on stealth gameplay, I'd like to see it a bit more fleshed out. But the biggest problem with this part of the game is the lack of puzzles and the difficulty of these puzzles. Many of these puzzles will solve themselves. For example, there's a puzzle box in one room where you need to figure out what sequence to enter a code in order to open it. And the solution is on a piece of paper, but you need to trace it in order to get the entire code. You do this by grabbing the pencil on the other side of the room, and then you walk back to trace the code and then open the puzzle box. Simple as that. There's another puzzle box like this where you'll need to look at pictures to see the code in the background, and all these pictures are in the same room as the puzzle box. It would have been much more interesting if you had to find and discover these photos in unrelated rooms and had to put it together yourself that they have the code for the second puzzle box. Many of the puzzles follow similar paths where the answers are extremely obvious and all key items you find get used immediately. In the old Resident Evil games, you'd sometimes find a key item, and if you couldn't think of a way to use it, you could put it in an item box, and then later you'd find the use case for it, and the game would reward you for making that connection yourself. The first Grace area, Rhodes Hill Hospital, is also much more linear than some of the areas in previous games. There's usually only one area to explore at a time instead of opening it up and letting you explore where you want. I'd like to see the more modern Resident Evil games go back to the Spencer Mansion level design from the first game. The Spencer Mansion had many areas you could explore at the start, and even if you explored the wrong area first, there were still important items and resources to find. Also, this area only lasts a few hours, and once you go into the basement, all these mechanics get thrown away and they're never used again. This is the only area that fully utilizes the traditional gameplay loop of Resident Evil, and in my opinion, I think this is the best part of the game. The basement is more about hide-and-seek horror. After that, finding the helicopter key is more or less a set piece, and then the whole Grace half of the game ends with another quick hide-and-seek moment with the girl before switching over to Leon. I think this is part of the problem I have with this game. Due to the split protagonist style, you don't get enough time with either playstyle to feel completely satisfied. But let's talk about the other half, right? During this time, you'll be running and gunning as Leon. Leon has you exploring a much larger area with many gameplay elements similar to the recent Resident Evil 4 remake. Instead of a knife, Leon will use an axe in this game, and the axe can be used to parry enemy attacks, and there are almost no limits to what can be parried. There's even one moment where you can parry a rocket launcher because why not? These characters are basically superheroes. You'll have access to the usual handgun, shotgun, machine gun, and the sniper rifle. The shooting in this game feels very good, the impacts they feel strong, and the recoil is there without being overbearing. You'll be able to upgrade these weapons at a merchant-like weapons box. You'll use points you acquire by killing enemies to upgrade the power, stability, and ammo storage of all your weapons. The level design for Leon's section is also a strong point. There's quite a few unique sections that'll shake up how you have to approach the usual enemies. One notable section has you standing over glass windows, and you can shoot out the bottoms to take out enemies. Leon can also stealth kill enemies, although it's not needed nearly as much as it is with Grace. All the animations look amazing here. There are plenty of contextual kill animations that'll have Leon popping heads against walls or waist-high objects. I also like how Leon changes his aiming posture depending on how close the enemies are. This expands on that John Wick style of handling that he would do in 4 Remake when enemies got too close. The newest feature added to Leon's gameplay loop is the ability to throw enemy weapons. If an enemy is holding a weapon and you knock it out of their hand, you can press a button to automatically pick it up and throw it at the nearest enemy. This staggers them, leaving them open for a one-shot axe finisher. I'm a little disappointed by the extent of this mechanic though. In the marketing material, it made it look like picking up enemy melee weapons would be a very prominent feature, but in reality, you only get to use the enemy chainsaw twice, and you never get to pick up and use any other weapon. It would have been much more interesting if you could pick up and then use enemy weapons that all had their own unique parry and finisher animations. I'd like to see this expanded in the future. It would have been cool if you could take the spear, for example, and throw it into 2 enemies, harpooning them together to then axe finish finish both of them. More options in the gameplay like this would make for more interesting strategies when combating enemies. I also have to mention that the weighty movement from 4 Remake returns here, but to be honest, I feel like it's been tuned up even further. When you play as either Grace or Leon in third person, the weighty controls make it easy to get stuck on the environment or to take damage from enemies because it takes a while to shift your momentum into the direction that you inputted. This isn't the worst thing for a survival horror section, but it becomes very evident during the action scenes. When you're trying to maneuver around a crowd of enemies, it can be frustrating when you can't do the precise movements you want because of how slow or weighty your character feels. I also feel like the Leon section doesn't do enough to evolve its gameplay when compared to the recent RE4R. The parry and axe finishers are very similar to the knife, just reskinned with different animations. The ability to throw weapons is nice, but like I said, it's not even as fleshed out as I would have hoped. I think adding some of the mechanics from Resident Evil 6 would have been nice. The ability to dive and roll would have helped with the enemies that have guns. I know you might think I'm crazy for wanting this game to have RE6 mechanics, but the truth is, RE6 had interesting ideas, but they were implemented terribly. Go play the motorcycle chase sequence in RE6, and then go play the chase section in Requiem. I want you to tell me which one's better. Overall, Leon's section is a lot of fun, but a lot of what's here felt like more of the same, which isn't a big negative, but it feels like a waste to bring back a character like Leon and not really try to evolve his gameplay loop. It also has pacing issues of its own. At one point during your romp through Raccoon City, they tear you away from Leon and they stick you in a flashback sequence where you're playing as a young girl stuck in an orphanage being hunted by some very not scary seeker enemies. This whole sequence is extremely scripted and it devolves down to hiding under a bed and then a table for multiple minutes until slow walking to the next part. Scripted moments like this are more or less interactive movies and they kill replayability. For me, Resident Evil is one of the most replayable franchises ever, but it's starting to trend in the direction of more and more scripted moments. The opening hour of this game is extremely slow moving, and moments like the orphanage just kill it even further. It's a far cry from Resident Evil 2 and 4 that start the core gameplay loop immediately and rarely ever deviate from it for long. Resident Evil 7 and 8 have similar problems. The intro to 7 was exciting the first time, but it drags on replays. An option to start at the dinner scene on new games would have helped to alleviate that problem. Same with Requiem. An option to start a new game when Leon hands Grace the Magnum would have been nice. I'm not sure how true it is, but I've heard that games now do this to hide their core game loop for long enough that once you start to realize it's not for you, it's too late to refund it. That's why many modern games will start with very hands-off interactive movie preludes before letting you loose. I don't understand why Resident Evil would do this for its new games when the remakes still have the old school design of starting immediately, and those all sold extremely well. As for endgame content, Requiem is lacking a bit compared to other Resident Evil games. Mercenaries is missing here, which is such a shame because this game would benefit massively from a Mercenaries mode. The ability to jump straight into the action side of the game without playing the slower Grace section would have been nice. But I don't want to cry too much about Mercenaries missing here because they might add it in at a later update like they did with RE4R. Additionally, the content shop is here again, allowing you to buy new items, weapons, and cheats like infinite ammo. But the biggest thing is the extra difficulty mode unlocked after beating the game called Insanity. I'm currently playing through the game again on Insanity, and at first I thought it would be too difficult to complete without infinite ammo. But now that I've gotten to the lab section again, it's much more doable than I first thought. I do believe that a hardcore difficulty mode somewhere between standard classic and Insanity would be appreciated. It feels like there is a little bit too big of a gap between the two. As for the story of Requiem, I'm going to cover this with minimal spoilers. It was extremely fun. I like Resident Evil stories that put fun first. Resident Evil is always better when it doesn't take itself super seriously like 6 did. A lot of the events in this game happen just because they knew fans would go crazy for them, even if they didn't make much sense. And honestly, that's fine with me. The rule of cool applies here. I felt Grace was a good addition to the cast. I really liked her character arc, and this is probably the most badass Leon has been since the original Resident Evil 4. This is the closest we got to that characterization of Leon in a while, and I appreciated that. My biggest gripe with the story is that they brought back an iconic villain and then they killed him off very unceremoniously. Why would you bring him back just to get rid of him again? It also doesn't make sense that the T-virus that's killing Leon and Sherry should also be affecting all of the other original characters that survived Raccoon City. And the fact that we didn't get a single line talking about how the others are also ill was very odd. It would have been a nice story setup if characters like Jill, Carlos, Claire, and Ada were too sick to be in the field and they were relying on Leon to save them. It would be like Leon getting a second chance to save those involved in the Raccoon City incident, since he feels he couldn't help anyone the first time.
Raccoon City was where it all began for me. Where it all happened, I couldn't make a difference. So I am here now.
It could also explain Chris's absence. You could argue that he was somewhere else pursuing leads trying to find a cure. It wouldn't make sense for him to be doing nothing while his sister is dying. A lot of the story beats fall apart when you stop to think about them, which is a negative. But to me, if you're gonna have a story that's illogical, it needs to make up for it by being entertaining, and I was very entertained by the story in this game. Overall, Requiem is another quality entry in the Resident Evil franchise, but I can't help but think that some of the drawbacks come from the devs splitting their attention between the two different playstyles. There's a lot of really interesting ideas here, but they're not as fleshed out as I would have liked, and it switches playstyles before you really feel satisfied with whichever half you were playing. I think if they were to approach this idea again, each playstyle should have its own campaign instead of one where you switch back and forth. This would eliminate the tonal whiplash, and players could replay whichever one they felt like at the time. Also, if there were two separate campaigns, each between 7 to 8 hours, that would give players enough time with each different playstyle to feel completely satisfied. My first playthrough on the in-game clock was 9.5 hours. Now this doesn't include cutscenes or deaths, so with those, it would be around 12 hours. RE4R is estimated to take between 15 to 20 hours on a first playthrough. If Requiem was that long, with at least 7 to 8 for both playstyles, I think a lot of the ideas introduced would have had the time they needed to be more appreciated. But ideally, in the future, Capcom might be better off choosing one style for a game and focusing 100% on that vision. A game for everyone is a game made for no one, especially since the rumored next two Resident Evil games are looking to be Code Veronica and Resident Evil Zero remakes. If that's true, those are both more traditional survival horror experiences, so maybe Requiem could have gotten away with being a more action horror game with Leon as the sole protagonist. A successor to the RE4 remake style of combat with a more fleshed out evolution of that game's loop. Or if we could have gotten a more focused survival horror experience that expands on the new zombie AI mechanics. But for what it is, I still really enjoyed Requiem. If I had to give it a rating without a hardcore mode or mercenaries, I'd probably give it an 8. The main drawbacks being the lack of replayability in this game compared to the recent 2 and 4 remakes, as well as the lack of additional modes. I think if they were to add mercenaries in the next few weeks, I'd confidently bump it up to an 8.5. Anyways, that's all from me. Let me know what you guys thought of Requiem, and if you agree with any of my opinions on it. Till next time, see ya.